fine. And
Okay.
And where's my view? It was all stream and go.
All right. Thank you, Torsten. Hi to our first Lunch and Learn of this year. It's the 4th edition in total. Before you start, just some housekeeping rules. It would be great if you keep your microphones off so our speakers can speak properly and can be heard. And you're welcome to turn the cameras on though. And we will have 3 speakers today who will each speak like 15 to 20 minutes. And afterwards we will open the room to question, because we would like to obviously have a discussion about both topics. And I think I'm just gonna start straight away and say without further ado, hi to Izzy House, who is joining us today from the US, even though there's such a time difference. Izzy has over 20 years experience in marketing and is a specialist in space marketing and just published a book about it. And she will tell us more about it now. Izzy, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. And I know it's afternoon there, but it's still very much morning here.
Yeah.
How can you change the world? Build a company or establish an industry if no one knows you exist? When we think about marketing, we think about the pushy salesmen that bug us on our way home after a very long day, or that irritating commercial that interrupts our program just as the championship is tied, keeping us on our end of our seats, and then bam, annoying. A commercial we've seen a million times. How many of us think this is marketing? And while it is a facet of marketing, it is the one we remember. There are so many other different kinds of marketing: promotions, outreach, public affairs, things that we want to see, things we want to hear. Unfortunately, this is what we think of when we think of marketing. But this is not what my book is about. My book is about making a connection with people. It's about establishing a relationship with your audience. And it's about creating a conversation through content. During that championship game, who was your team? Do you have clothing of your favorite team? How many of us own NASA t-shirts? What's your favorite restaurant, car, or sport? What career are you passionate about? Without marketing, you would not know any of that stuff. Without marketing, the team you love, poof, never existed. Without marketing, the Apollo program would have never existed. The rockets would have never launched from the Earth, and man would never have walked on the moon. Without marketing, vaccines that would have never saved children from the polio ravages, or the ideals of freedom would never have transformed a country. Marketing can build lives. It can save lives. It can change lives. Marketing can empower dreams. This is the kind of marketing that I share. Now, the book that I have, that I just launched, is basically a beginner's guide to marketing and its principles. It has tactics and strategies in it that you can see real world examples. And there's a fictitious company that I have threaded through where we take the strategies and we take the tactics and we apply them. So you can see how it's used. And then once you go through all of these basics, then we talk about how to hire a team to do your marketing. So it's basically like a beginner's guide for people just getting into the industry. And why did I create this book? When I first began my career in marketing, I was a part of an environmental incubator And in this particular incubator, they had all kinds of technology that could really make our planet a better planet. They had new ways of doing electricity. They had new ways of dealing with garbage. It was phenomenal. I was surrounded by geniuses. And these geniuses could not communicate their worth or their product's worth. And therefore, most of them never left the incubator. It was pretty sad. They assumed that they had something great and that the world would come right to them because their product was so great. Now, I see a similar type of thing happening within the space industry. Space companies, they've had the NASA contracts, they've had a few investors, and that's about it. That's all they had to woo. Well, now you have between 70 and 144 countries, depending on which stats you look at. Now all of them have space programs, where there was only a couple of companies doing something like a moon lander. Now, how many moon landers do we have going on in the world? Competition is not the same. Plus, you have a lot of products now that are going straight to the public. Communications, cell phone, GPS. It is a different world than it was even 5 years ago. Competition is getting intense. So therefore, companies need to learn how to market effectively. And this book is speaking to them. This is an introduction to them about this is marketing. This is what you need to think about. Because at the end of the day, my goal is to promote space. I really don't want the next 50 years to be like the last 50 years. And it was an amazing thing during the 60s to see man step on the moon, but we never went back. And that's partially because marketing hasn't taken off. And it's all of our responsibility to make sure that the space industry gets marketed correctly. There are a bunch of narratives out there that tend to skew it and will hamper our trips beyond if we let it. So we have to market effectively. We have to combat those that don't want the space industry to succeed. I know that in the UK, you have a lot of people, talking about how space pollutes. Well, space, part of it does pollute, but there is a very big, important part of space that we want it to not pollute. We have to be able to learn how to use other fuels if we want to get past the moon. Well, car manufacturers don't have that. They have legislation that is dictating them to stop polluting. But the space industry doesn't need that. We will do it because we want to go further. But we need to combat the narrative that's going on. And I recently wrote an article about the space tourism. I'm going to switch my screen here. Last year was a phenomenal year for space tourism, for space in general. We had Richard Branson go on his maiden voyage with Virgin Galactic. We had Jeff Bezos follow 9 days later with his flight. And then we had Inspiration 4. 3 very impactful events, 3 very different marketing outcomes. For starters, Branson started off the summer. It was great. And then he had a slight misstep, and one that a lot of us probably would do and not think anything of it. He pre-recorded his bicycle ride to the tarmac. Well, then something happened that day and he couldn't do it, but they still ran with it. And what was a momentous event was marred by that fib. You don't ever lie. People will catch you. And when they do, they get very disappointed. It's like your mom or your dad that are very disappointed in you. Their stocks ended up tumbling about $25 a share as a result. Not positive that's a result, but that's what I saw. And then 9 days later, we have Jeff Bezos coming out of the blue and sending his rocket up with no warning. Virgin Galactic, we knew about Branson, but we really didn't know anything about the people he was flying with. Who were they? They were employees. They were just not highlighted. Bezos, even worse. It was his brother, and it was some 18-year-old that paid millions of dollars for the ticket. And then there was a very prestigious pilot, and her name just went out of my head.
You mean Valley Funk?
Yes, her.
You're welcome.
And that was a miss on their part. Jeff Bezos has kind of been secretive, and that has not helped him one bit, or has it helped space? Now, when we compare both of their events to the Inspiration 4 event, we have 3 billionaires. They are all billionaires. And I'm not counting Elon Musk, because it was really Jared that marketed the Inspiration 4 and did such a phenomenal job with it. They started way in advance. They planned what they were doing. They had a competition on social media, so it got the word out just on the get start. He picked people that had really interesting stories that could relate to the modern day, the everyday person. We could see ourselves in them. With Netflix and all the interviews, we got to know them just as we got to know the Apollo astronauts. We got to know the Inspiration 4 astronauts. And when they finally went up, we went with them. That was the difference between watching Jeff Bezos and Richard Branson, is that we were watching that happen, but we weren't really a part of it. We were somewhat with Branson, but not with Bezos. Bezos came out of the blue. He did not think about his audience at all, and he just did what he was going to do. And as a result of his actions, everybody started to see space as a billionaires club that you had no access to. And if it hadn't been for the Inspiration 4, I think it would still feel this way. We were not as concerned with Jared's billionaireness because he brought the world with him. And that was a big difference. They villainized Bezos for being a billionaire. And he ended up spending $419 million towards special causes, which we knew nothing about. There was like 20 of them. So it was kind of like he threw that money into nothing that he was able to even talk to us about. And then Inspiration 4, they put $200 million, they raised $200 million towards the Children's Hospital, St. Jude's Children's Hospital, which we could relate to. And that was part of the story. He created a story about the cause. He created a story about each of the people that were going on the mission. And it was a completely different experience. We didn't care that he was a billionaire because we thought he was a responsible billionaire. Jeff Bezos looked like a playboy. And then he had the 18-year-old on there, which a lot of us cannot relate to an 18-year-old having millions of dollars disposable to pay for a ticket. And then his brother was on there, which you have to be born into that. There's nothing we can do to connect with that. And I think it was a really big misstep to not really talk about Wally Funk's story. That would have been a great thing to lead with months in advance and to really get that word out. When you have a cause, you have a story, and you do the plan, and you connect with the audience, it has a completely different result for the industry as a whole, as well as the people involved. And you don't get stink on you. So, how can you change the world, build a company, establish an industry if no one knows you exist? Marketing makes you exist. So with that, that was my prepared part.
Thank you so much, Izzy. Thank you for giving your insights also on how you compared all those 3 events last year, because you're right, they were obviously really dominating the news as well outside of the space sector, more so than anything else. And I actually have one question for you immediately before we continue, because I just would like to touch on that, especially about the Inspiration 4, because you're right, they were really well prepared with all the social media and whatnot. But we here in Europe especially, we saw them launch and then we heard nothing, because we didn't realize that they had basically that they were not allowed to communicate because of the Netflix last part. So they launched and then there was nothing on Twitter. And I remember, for example, us talking in a conversation also with like Torsten and Remco, who's not here today. We're like, is everything okay? There's radio silence since the launch. Are they okay? Because we actually didn't hear that they weren't allowed to basically communicate this because of their deal with Netflix. And I was wondering how that was communicated in the US, because maybe it was just a completely different narrative that we didn't see here. I'd just be really curious.
I believe that was something they could have done better as well, because for 3 days we waited. And of course, I was anxious to see that drop down when they came in from the planet or came back into the atmosphere. But yeah, there wasn't very much going on here. We were filling the time with the Netflix. And if you'd already watched all of that, well, then you're just sitting there on the edge of your seat. Yeah. They could have filled that time with a little bit more about what they were doing and maybe given us a peek or two into some of the events. And I do think it ended up being streamed somewhere. There was some site that did have some information. I never knew what it was. They did not communicate that well. So I was in the dark like you.
Okay, so that was the same over in the US, because we really had a conversation like, it's not normal if you hear nothing. Is everything okay? Did something happen? Are they having a strategy where they now trying to figure out how to communicate what happened? So I was just curious, because this seemed to really get people worried, but also talking. So maybe that was an intention,
Well, I would have liked to have been there on the orbit with them. I really would have. I would have loved to have seen everything happen as it did. When they pulled the cupola down and got to see the planet for the first time. I would have liked that to have been more than just a scene in a Netflix documentary. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Izzy. I think we're going to have more questions for you later, and would now just go to our next speakers. And thank you again for the first great presentation. The second speakers, I think you're going to speak together, Julio Aprea and Kay Noske. Julio is an engineer with NASA who does the communication for the space transportation systems, and was actually at the web launch in December and basically reported from the Ariane perspective. And Kay Noske is now I hope I say this right, ESA science communicator, chief communicator. You have to correct me if I'm saying this wrong. And was basically the mastermind behind the ESA web communication campaign. And both of them are sharing their insights about this now. And Julio, I believe you will also talk about your podcast, your Spanish space podcast afterwards.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Hi, welcome both of you.
Hi.
Yes.
Let me see. I would like to share the screen. Mm-hmm. You have here, share screen. Uh-oh. I don't think it's letting me share the screen, eh?
Okay, Torsten, can you have a quick check?
1 second.
Thank you.
I think if he is on
the presentation because I am joining from the browser.
Yep. Okay. I think that's the point.
Zoom from the actual app.
No, I am on Zoom. You know what I'm going to do, Thorsten? I'm going to send you the file via here. It's probably easier. Can I?
Yeah, certainly.
This is.
Try to do it again, Julio. I just made you a co-host, so. Nothing should stop you.
I think what is stopping me is ESA's own limitations on Zoom. So this is why I'm saying, let me just share the presentation with you.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, and this is something that Comms 101 we should have tested before. I apologize.
Okay, no problem.
So let's see.
Where do you send it to me?
I will send it to you via email. Do you have, is it possible to transfer files here?
I think so, yeah.
Yes, you should be able to just drop it in the chat to Thorsten directly.
Okay, Thorsten. Let's get you on the chat, and then let's just transfer the file to you.
I'm just going to use this moment and say, if you have any questions for the speakers, also drop them in the chat, and we can ask them directly. If you don't want to turn on your microphone later, we're happy to do that for you.
Okay, this is not happening. Okay, I propose that we do it without presentation, okay? Because otherwise, shame, because I spent some time on it. But I think Kai has seen it, and Kai and I can give you an overview of the presentation itself, okay?
Perfect, thank you.
But why don't we ask Izzy another question, because I have a burning question. You send it to me on WhatsApp or on email in parallel, and we figure it out while Izzy conveys her answer. How's that?
Okay, go for it.
That sounds like a good plan. So, thank you, Thorsten.
my question to Izzy is, can you tell us a bit about your background? Because I find it super fascinating where you are right now and what you do, but what was a way to be there? I mean, we are all not born space marketing specialists, of course.
Well, when I was 13 years old, I visited my grandparents for the summer. And instead of Disney World, we went to Kennedy Space Center. That summer, they connected me with science fiction, and I went into my 9th grade year wanting to colonize a planet. And of course, everybody looked at me like I was crazy, so I quit talking about it. And then I ended up going into marketing, which I have absolutely loved. When I got my first degree, then I started my business in San Diego. And I worked with over 600 different small businesses. I loved helping small businesses get their communications out. When I moved to Kentucky, I ended up starting another business. I sold that business and started another one in Kentucky. And then I had to homeschool my son for high school. It was a very challenging time. I cherry-picked a few clients. And then when he got ready to graduate, I thought, what's next? So I went back to school and I got my master's. And then after that, I went to Kennedy Space Center and I thought, I could do both. I could have space and marketing. And the rest is history.
That's cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, if there's still time, I'm going to ask you one more question. Just because you talked about the narratives that are in the space sector, that outside the space sector, that maybe manage to get out of the bubble that we are all in our industry. And you said that there's obviously some narratives that are actually more harmful than positive. In your opinion, what narrative that we currently see in like the common media that actually reaches everyone is the one that might actually hurt the space sector?
The ones about rockets polluting.
Yeah, all right.
That's a big one. People are, we shouldn't be putting as many rockets and because that's polluting. Well, when the rockets are polluting. Let's say, yes, it is. But where they're going impacts the planet a whole lot more. They're going to learn how to do fuels in situ that are made out of water, that are made out of nuclear, the solar energy alone that has been developed just based off of satellites has impacted our pollution down here. We have the incentive to use other fuels that are cleaner, whereas factories and cars, they really don't. They have incentives to keep the polluting way. Because the last time I checked, there were no dinosaurs on the moon. and there was no dinosaurs on Mars or any of the other planets, there may be some way out there, but we're not going to be able to benefit that particular fuel. So we have the incentive to learn how to do it a greener way. And if they just give us a little bit of time, then we will. But there are too many good things that come from space. I mean, they're learning how to 3D print a human heart out of stem cells that our body will not reject. If we never fly up to space, then how can we get those things done? So we have to control that narrative. We have to tell them why it's important, which is my other project that I'm working on, which is Our Connection to Space. It's a book that talks about all the things that we have in our daily lives that came from space. It came from our reach for space, and why it's important to keep supporting that. If we let these other narratives go, then we'll be crippled on whether or not they'll let rockets go. And it will cripple our space industry, and we can't afford that.
I think, if I may, there is part of that narrative sometimes. Why the focus on rockets? You know, everything pollutes.
Absolutely.
The ships going around the planet running our economy, they pollute a lot more than a rocket. You eating a sandwich pollutes. Everything pollutes. So I don't know why. I mean, I guess it's the more clickbaity, you know, right? Oh, look, out of control rocket is going to impact the moon, and you get a lot of clicks out of that. But is it really that big of a deal? No, not really. But it's the lack of context and the focus on what makes people click on things, right? What will generate the most reaction?
Yeah. And I would look at the source of those messages as well. I mean, if we really dig deep, I bet you we would find those sources of those messages come from people that are competitors, that don't want our countries to succeed in making it to the moon.
Indeed. Okay.
Thank you.
But may I jump in here as well?
Yeah.
Because the discussion about sustainability, I mean, it's rising, and it's coming more and more. So I do think that we should hear these people that also talking about how rockets polluting, because destroying the ozone is something what is a given fact. It's not something what is fiction, and that's proven with the boosters and so on. And yes, we didn't have the cadence of launches so far that the ozone couldn't heal itself. So far it worked, but what about 30 and more launches a day? So what will be the impact of that? So taking it from that angle, I personally, or we on Spacewatch side, taking it very serious, this discussion. What the other one saying, oh, a rocket is bad because it's a rocket. Okay, take them off. Yeah, and here we have to take a fine line in between. Just my 5 cents.
Yeah, I think it really depends on who's saying it. I mean, you're absolutely right. This is a concern that needs to be discussed. It needs to be changed. But there's a difference if like an expert says it, or if someone who doesn't even know maybe where to get the right information to actually make a statement about pollution, just saying space is not good because rockets pollute, without actually knowing what the entire issue is. I think it's just that a lot of people are making statements, and this actually goes for everything and not just space and not just rockets, without actually knowing all the information. And that might be then damaging to an industry as a whole.
But we're coming back to the marketing piece on that.
Exactly.
Easy.
And let's look at the holes in the ozone for a minute. It was actually us getting up to space that saw them in the first place and was able to change the aerosols down here. And now they're healing those polar holes. So where we should have I think it's the northern one is supposed to be healed by the 2030s. And it has made a big impact. Us being in space, seeing that helped heal our planet.
The ugly truth is it will not heal because climate change is kicking in now and burning it from the other side. But yeah.
But we're able to see that from satellites we put up there.
No doubt.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good.
We do have a question in the chat.
We can get Alia on the board.
Exactly. Isla wrote, from my studies and narratives about space, I would say that environment and pollution are a factor. However, what seems to be more damaging is the fact that to many people, space is more of an unreal, faraway dream of some distant future and not something related to our everyday lives in the now. What do you think about that?
Well, and that's why I'm writing that book, is because it does affect everything we do, from our cell phones to the meeting that we're having right now. Even the bedding that we sleep on, the memory foam, came from space. And the vaccine that a lot of us have had for COVID, the research for that was something that was done in the International Space Station. So space comes back at us. The diabetics, the strips that we check our blood sugar, that was to check astronauts on the International Space Station. So we would not have that technology had we not been in space. So we need to just make sure that the narrative we're putting out is, yes, this is how space affects you. This is how it touches you every breath you take. And that's what we need to, as a group, we need to make sure that that message is getting out there.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Thank you, Izzy. I think we have the presentation now that Julio and Kai have prepared. Torsten, will you? Yes, he's sharing the screen. So Julio,
great.
Kai,
Yes.
Over to you. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Thorsten, for fixing this on the spot. So, yes, Remco and Judith invited me to talk a little bit about the communications campaign around what I think was, for sure, the launch, one of the most important launches for Ariane 5, and I would say the launch of 2021, which was the James Webb. After decades of development, the telescope is finally in space, recently reached its position in the Lagrange point 2. And I wanted to give you a bit of a backstage on what went behind this communications campaign, at least from my area, more on the ESA communications and especially the Ariane side. However, I also thought that it would be great to invite my colleague Kai Nosk, who was more of the orchestra man behind this communications campaign, who put together a solid communications plan out of which all of the rest of us in the team could do this work that was done. Maybe we can go to the second slide so we can each introduce ourselves. I will let Kai introduce himself first.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I am an astrophysicist and I'm the Science Director's Communication Officer for the European Space Agency. So my task is to coordinate communication of the ESA Space Science Program, which is all science that we do with space missions from space. And
I'm Julio Aprea. I have a big disclaimer to make here that I'm not a communications professional. I'm an engineer who dabbles in this. So you can expect that I don't really speak the same language as many of you communication professionals. And so please stop me or ask questions. I will take this opportunity, if possible, more as a dialogue and hopefully I will learn a lot from this presentation and your comments.
If I may just, this is actually, we are both in the same boat, Julio and I, because he's an engineer, I'm a scientist by training, and we've both been doing communication, but still, it is a tightrope walk and it is a cultural ambassador walk. That's a learning experience from both of us between the science and technical world and the communication world on both sides. It's an interesting experience.
Historically, I have been involved mostly with what is the project management of space projects, that is contracts, following schedules. In the past 3 years, I started working on the topic of communications, mostly because I really love space outreach and I have this urge to bring it to the public, to bring it to a wider audience, what we do internally. Maybe we can move to the next slide. Thorsten. So first of all, we wanted to give you a little bit of an overview of why ESA, why Ariane, why there was a communications campaign on the ESA side. So the first point is that the James Webb is an international collaboration between 3 space agencies: NASA, the European Space Agency, and the Canadian Space Agency.
Sorry.
The wonders of teleworking, working from home. It's fine. So, and each, as in any international collaboration, each of the partners, let's say, contributes in part to the mission. And the ESA's contribution on the one side is manpower, teams of astronomers and engineers working in different sites, including in Baltimore. We could call it an instrument and a half, right? We have the near spec and half of the media instrument, plus the contribution, which is where I was mostly involved, which is the launch using an Ariane 5 rocket. As you can imagine, when you put such an important payload on a rocket, there is a lot behind that as well. I let Kai contribute if you have anything to add on this.
I think that captures it pretty well. It doesn't really matter which particular parts of the instruments. It is really a major contribution to the overall mission, and as we will show later, it is a major contribution that went it came from many European partners. It is really a pan-European effort, a coordinated pan-European effort to join a mission of such a magnitude.
So it was important then to show this partnership, to show who does what, and to bring to the public how the importance of how international collaboration can make these projects happen. Projects that normally one country on their own cannot really achieve is outside of their grasp, is when you really need many partners collaborating together. We have it with the International Space Station, with James Webb. In Artemis, many countries are joining as well. Maybe we can move to the next slide, which is a very high-level idea of, this is not hierarchical, it looks hierarchical, but it was more as a way to try to show you how it was a big communications operation. Kai and I are part of a much bigger team with many people dealing with many aspects of this communications campaign, each one of them a hero on their own. And we wanted to make sure that you know that this was a major, I would say it was the main communications campaign of the year for ESA in 2021. Kai, would you agree?
It was probably the most visible launch event. It also had several aspects because of the how much of a visibility the international space launcher market currently experiences. And how many questions ESA and the European space sectors are facing in that regard. ESA, Arianespace, and their partnership especially. It was a very high visibility event. That was a big chance for us, for sure. To showcase not only the scientific capabilities, but also the capabilities in terms of project management, of logistics, and of the European space launch capabilities. And this was overall branded in the end as a Team Europe effort. So very high stakes, very high opportunity setting. Therefore, of course, with many expectations from the many different partners that Julio is going to show, I think, the next slide, from both inside the agency, all different parties inside ESA.
Can you still hear me? I think, am I disconnected or is Kai disconnected?
No, Kai is disconnected. We can still hear you.
Okay.
Do you want to take over for a second?
As we are on this slide of different parts. Okay.
What was the last part you heard?
You were talking about different partners.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. If I may, then I will just to conclude on this slide that they're in, as you can see, we had people from ESA, corporate communications mostly. There was a very robust communications plan that I would say the main captain of this communications plan was Kai. He was, like I said, he was gonna be humble, but he was the orchestra man behind this operation. Then there were different areas of ESA, corporate and non-corporate communications dealing with the press management, especially the press trips and logistics to Kourou, which are no small activity. And of course, preparing spokespeople, managing the interviews. There was a whole area with what we call VIP operations and logistics. Before this launch was, I would say, affected by the new wave of COVID and the launch during Christmas time, we were expecting a major number of people visiting Kourou. And one of the things to highlight is that Kourou is no Florida, meaning it's no Kennedy Space Center, meaning you don't have the hotel capacity, the restaurant capacity that you have in that area of the world. It's quite limited. So whenever you have a large number of people visiting, you will run into logistical issues of capacity. So this was important for managing that part. Then, of course, editorial and social media, which I'm sure that during the launch itself, you have seen the different interactions of social media between ESA and the web ESA account and the Ariane 5 account. Then, I don't know, Kai, the people working behind this, mostly Kai manages them. Then we had a contingency plan that, thanks God, you didn't get to see. But a lot of work went into the what happens if the launch doesn't go nominal, and who will talk when about what, and what are the responsibilities of each partner. Which brings me to the stockholder and interface coordination, which I will go back to that in the next slide. And finally, the video operations, video and photography, right? You have photographers on site, there are security constraints, there are operations, hardware operations that are just dangerous. And for instance, when you're fueling the rocket. So if you're a photographer, if you're shooting video, you have to get lots of approvals and follow lots of procedures to be allowed to do that. And then behind that, there is the whole issue of who's taking the photos, sharing with whom, who is approving what can be seen and not, how are we going to distribute it, what is the most effective way to distribute them to the audience. That was a big part of that discussion. I will go to the interfaces, because this was, I think, one of the big challenges of this mission. During the launch itself, the main partners were NASA, obviously the US Space Agency, the European Space Agency, the Canadian Space Agency, and Arianespace. Arianespace, the operator of Ariane 5. Ariane 5, the rocket. ESA basically bought and contracted the launch from Arianespace to launch James Webb on an Ariane 5. ESA also managed the modifications that needed to be done to this rocket in order to be able to launch James Webb, which had a few particularities to be managed. But that's not the end of it. That's around the launch days. But there is a huge number on a project, the magnitude of James Webb, of different entities that, first of all, had a say or contributed to the project itself, and then, of course, will want to communicate about it. Just some examples. The prime contractor, Northrop Grumman, which was mostly interfaced by NASA, the Space Telescope Science Institute, Academy, universities. I put in the slide, you can see those are just the European partners. Imagine worldwide. A major person to coordinate all of this was Kai. So Kai, I guess maybe you can say a few words on that.
As most of you know, thank you. If you are having a large project with a lot of partners, especially with very limited resources from your own side, you have to build teams of teams, delegate as much work as possible, and build structures. Fortunately, we had just been ESA-wide moved to Microsoft Teams with the possibility to opening this to external partners, and we tried to crowdsource as much as possible when it came to sharing data and sharing activities. Regardless, you're spending a lot of time in maintaining participant and member lists and setting up meetings, preparing them, preparing content, and making sure the workflows running, that publications and all activities are coordinated, all while internally coordinating your own products and activities among your own teams. So it was quite a mammoth effort, and it had to rely again on, we had to ask all our partners to be as proactive as possible, to also organize themselves and share and take the initiative on sharing their own activities so that we could coordinate them as a whole. Particularly challenging, I want to say, and Julio himself had a big role in that himself, where the interfaces to the main partners in the top left, NASA, Canadian Space Agency and Arianespace, because then, of course, it came to questions like ownership of this massive mission that NASA was leading, definitely shouldered the vast majority of the bill, and visibilities, meaning branding, co-branding. We spent a lot of time negotiating that between the different branding departments, offices in the respective partners, communication departments, and had a lot of issues also when it came to, had a lot of agreements to make and a lot of common ground to find, compromises to negotiate when it came to high visibility activities like the joint video broadcast for the launch proper, for example. And this is, I think, where in the end the majority of the time went. We have very highly qualified editors for content, both in the directorate Julio is working for, which is the Rockets Space Transportation Directorate, as well as on our side in science. We have great people doing graphical, visual content, animations. All of this, of course, had to be coordinated, had to be well planned, and in the end, it always felt like, unfortunately, from home office, like being in a giant command, in a giant control center, control room. And a lot of time, obviously, went into these often late night discussions across the ocean with partners to be a bit of the diplomatic lubricant, to make sure that everybody had everything they needed, especially since Julio and I are both not top management. So we also had to be in contact with them on our side, but also on the partner side, to make sure that all the political interests, visibility ramifications, and so on, were being implemented in what we were doing.
Yes, I would like to stress that whenever you do international collaboration in space, mostly because international collaboration between space agencies means no exchange of funds, means bartering, means each one contributes with certain elements. There is a whole component of policy and project management, a whole overhead on this that makes things more complex. However, I like to think that in the end, it's worth it. This is, like I said before, this is how you can even have projects like the International Space Station or James Webb. This also, as Kai already described in detail, applies to the communications operation. But it's such, international collaboration is complex, and it affects the whole project. And in particular, once you get closer to a major milestone like the launch, it certainly affects the communication teams and how they interface with each other. Kai, one major aspect you were also...
Thank you. Just 1 second. We have a little bit of a time limit, so we have a few more minutes before we can ask some questions, if that's okay, just for the timekeeping. Yeah. Thank you.
I will move on. Then let's move on to the next slide, please. So here, Thorsten is going to open a link to YouTube. Please play it without sound. I'm I'm sure most of you have seen this video anyway. I sent you the link already in the chat. There was a YouTube link in space, which I'm sure that many of you have seen already. And the video is 2 minutes long. I will actually just select and copy the link here on the chat so you can see it later if you want. Let me see. I will just put it for everyone. So feel free to have a look later. So it's not standard to have onboard video on an Ariane 5 launch. So I wanted to tell you this presentation now, it was more about what we leave out of the presentation than what we leave in. So, but this video in particular, I fell in love with it when I watched it because it brought so much joy. Having onboard video on, we did not launch a bicycle, definitely. YouTube is getting worse and worse with the amount of advertisement. That's not the video, by the way. So it's not standard to have an Ariane 5 with onboard video. Hopefully this will change for Ariane 6. But we wanted to have cameras showing James Webb. What Kai and I, well, at least I started working on this project about 14 months ago. I was really happy when I heard that there would be cameras, but I was not so happy when I heard that the plans were to record the video, have a look at it a day or two after, and then eventually release it to the public. So I really love it internally a lot to show this video live, the launch separation, the payload separation as live as possible. There is a component of the engineering side that wants to be conservative. These cameras, these videos were mostly for engineering purposes. But as you can see, if you saw that video, it has a major communications impact. I had to lobby to the highest levels of the agency, to Arianespace, to get our main stockholders to see the benefits of having this video almost live. And finally, we managed to show it during the video transmission, during the launch itself. You did not see that behind the scenes. First, we downloaded the video from the rocket, and we had 3 people from NASA, from Arianespace, and from ESA watching it first and validating that they were happy to show it on the spot. And then we show it. And this video was something that was certainly not expected in the video, but NASA already commented on it after. It showed the solar panels opening of James Webb. That was just magical. And I don't know how to express the amount of reactions when we published that, during the video transmission itself, but later, when a few days after we published the clean video with the animation and everything, not the animation, with the video and the music, the amount of reaction in the metrics, the views, the likes, the shares that this got. So basically, what I want to make the point here, sometimes we have to take risks. We have to show things because I think it pays off in the end. Kai, maybe you want to comment on this.
About risk taking, yes, for us, I think the risk that our management and all partners took was that none of them really knew each other pretty well for such a high stakes event, and we had to negotiate on all hierarchy levels. Trust, so that everybody would enter the campaign knowing that, trusting that all other partners would honor the agreements and that everybody would get their share of visibility, of positive messaging, which I think happened in the end really well by pooling all these resources, pooling the knowledge, which we had to because ESA is operating the spaceport from where the launch actually happened. NASA was operating the Goddard Space Flight Center where the TV studio was located, exchanging the spokespeople and making sure everything was happening, all the complex switching processes that had to work, and I think it worked well. NASA TV told us this was the biggest thing they had ever done. They were not around for Apollo, obviously, but during their lifetime, during the last couple of decades, for them, this was the biggest communication event, which means bigger than recent history astronaut launches to the International Space Station. And I think it had a similar sentiment for ESA and also Arianespace, given that this mission had such a strong, also problematic history. In the end, it was a very big effort, and I don't think any of us were very up for really imagined how complex it would turn out, and it did. And now we'll try to do some knowledge capture, obviously, to see what the lessons learned are, so that for the upcoming big things that will be happening, be it the Mars rover landing, be it the Ariane 6 launch, and similar high visibility, high stakes events, which also, of course, gain a lot of importance, a lot of relevance, because they are politically charged. They're charged by high expectation, based also on previous on previous accidents, on lack of success or delays, putting a lot of expectation pressure on the respective agencies, on the industries. So we will have these events coming up, and we need to transfer as much as possible as we learned from this past campaign to the upcoming ones.
So
thank you both so much. Yes, please, thank you.
No, I would like to conclude. I will obviously skip the part of the podcast. We don't have time for that. Happy to talk about it another time. This was more difficult to decide what to leave in than what to leave out. There is lots to talk about this campaign. It was massive amount of work in the past 14 months, at least for me, and the big team behind. I'm happy to answer your questions. And Kai, during the launch itself, Kai was in Europe. I was at the spaceport. I have given a few interviews already to the day-to-day of the launch itself and what happened there, the reaction of the public, all that. So anyway, I think it's better that we stop here. And then, yeah.
Thank you both so much. Thank you for joining today. This is obviously a topic that is interesting to many. And as you said, it was such a huge campaign. So no wonder there's almost not enough time ever to talk about this. We normally would stop already a few minutes ago. I am just going to ask before we conclude today if there are any questions. And if someone wants to ask a question, I think we have time for 1 or 2 questions.
I would like to ask Izzy about her opinion about this marketing campaign. So what you just heard. How do you see
James
that?
Webb?
Yeah, from the ESA side. I mean, you also see, of course, the NASA side.
I'm very excited about the James Webb, and I have shared many posts on it because I think it is a phenomenal opportunity, and I'm excited to see what will happen. I think that, as with anything, as our industry and our social media gets bigger, then it's like a big rock. I mean, it takes a lot of effort to do just a small amount of work now, because there's just so many different ways that you can communicate. So what they have taken on has been huge, and I applaud them, and I love the videos that have come out, and good job making that live.
Yes, I can actually, just to reiterate what Izzy just said, I can actually agree. And also, as you said, Julio, when we saw that video of the separation, that was an emotional moment. And I had actually, I think like many of us were actually, it was Christmas with our families. And at least me as a space communicator, I actually for client live tweeted this event and watched it with the family. And even members of my family that are not in the space sector got really emotional seeing that, because it's just such a human achievement and such an achievement in international cooperation that I felt this was a really great story to tell, that, this is not just, as we said earlier, something for billionaires, something that has nothing to do with anyone, but you watched history. And that was just, I think, really obvious to a lot of people. And that's why I think this was actually a campaign or an event that really got people that normally not interested in space interested in it. And I think in that regard, it was from all sides, from ESA, from NASA, from the Canadian Space Agency. It was really, in my opinion, really successful to get the message out there.
Thank you. I have to say it was, as you know, it was on the 25th of December. Many of us that were working in Kourou for this launch were away from our families during Christmas. I was personally trying not to think about it. There was a lot of crying and emotions when it launched, when it was power positive, meaning that it was receiving energy. Scientists that were on site were, again, in tears of emotion and happiness. What really broke me was when I got a photo of my 3 kids from the back watching the TV with the rocket there, and then I learned that at some point I apparently appeared in the video, like in the background, and they completely freaked out, and that was when I freaked out in a good way, and that's the point when I was thinking, wow, this is really reaching. Of course they are watching because I'm there, but for me it felt like an Apollo moment.
I have to agree. I mean, obviously I never too young to watch the Apollo launches, but it felt like the one launch people would watch, even if they're not into space, but they realized how important this was. And I think I can only imagine how emotional it must have been at the spaceport after 25 years of work on this, seeing it sent off. It must have been an amazing, amazing feeling.
I participated to many launches, many payloads. The level of public awareness, I had like friends from the rugby team asking me about it. My parents normally would not understand and they heard it somewhere on TV. So obviously you hear it on TV and then it becomes important apparently. So yeah, I never participated in something as big as this one. It was quite a learning experience, and I'm thankful that I was part of it.
Well, thank you for sharing your experience and sharing what went on behind the scenes to, communicate this event. I think that actually, unfortunately, because we could, I think, talk forever, concludes Lunch and Learn for today, but we're a little bit over time. But Izzy, Julio, I want to really thank you for joining us today and for sharing your experience and expertise. We will, put the video of today online, so you can share it afterwards with your followers, and obviously we'll share it with our followers. I'd like to invite everyone watching to follow Powering Space. We have a Lunch and Learn every month. The next one is, I think, the 24th of February. Thank you to my colleagues Torsten, Ryan, Remco, and Charlie. We are all on the executive board of Powering Space for organizing this. And I also want to let you know that we have another event coming up next week on the 2nd of February called The Elephant in the Room, where we will talk about abuse and harassment in the space sector. It's a very serious topic, but you can still register for this event. It's also for free. So with this, I want to conclude today. Thank you again to our amazing speakers. And we hope to see you at the next Lunch and Learn. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you very much.
Thank you.